Okay. Yeah, thank you, Lala, and good morning, our colleague in the Netherlands, and good afternoon, uh, our colleague in Indonesia. And I would like to welcome you to this webinar series held by the Research Center for Area Studies of the National Research and Innovation Agency, the Indonesian BRIN. I would like also to thank, first of all, Pak Riwanto for accepting our invitation to join the webinar, and also I would like to thank Dr. Akin Yuade for also accepting our invitation to present or to say something, to tell stories about demography in Africa. And also my thanks, thank you also goes to Lide for your continuous support of our African Studies program at our centers. And again, thank you very much, Lide. And I would like not I just like to say something, just a small little things, that this series of African Studies webinar is actually part of this our effort to develop our African Studies program at our centers. So since I think a couple months ago that we've been conducting a series of webinar and featuring presenters from both sides of the world, the Indonesian side and also the African side. So we are hoping that this webinars series will be as our small step, small effort to build more continuous collaborations with our African partners, and also facilitated by the African Studies Center at Leiden. So I hope that we the webinar actually covers different issues from politics, economics, and social literatures. And today we have our experts in demography who will be talking about the uh, demography in Indonesia and also in Africa. Yeah, I think that is my brief introduction, and I hope you will learn a lot about Africa, especially our Indonesian colleagues from the presentations, and our colleagues from Africa also can learn a lot about Indonesia. Thank you again, and we hope that you will be also participating in the next series of African Roots webinar in the coming futures. Thank you, and silakan Lala dilanjut.
Terima kasih Mas Fajar. Thank you Mas Fajar. Ladies and gentlemen, this discussion will be led by Mas Helmi from Area Studies Research Center. So Mas Helmi, please, your time.
Thank you, Lala, and also Kak Mas Fajar. Jadi, good morning for you who come from the Netherlands or from Africa, and good afternoon for my colleagues in Indonesia. Welcome to the African Roots webinar number 6. Today we have two distinguished speakers who will shed light on different aspects of African demography and politics. Pak Riwanto and Dr. Aki Yinka are the country coordinators for tracking development programs. So actually, these two distinguished speakers are my supervisors, Pak Riwanto in Indonesia and Aki Yinka in Nigeria. Well, the first presentation will focus on Africa's population dynamics and inclusive development, while the second presentation will explore the role of political demography in the making and unmaking of nations. Pak Yuwono Sudarsono, in the introduction of Pak Riwanto's book, In Search of Indonesia, notes that there is no more fundamental and determining knowledge for the future of a nation than the knowledge of population or demography. The number, structure, quality, and distribution of a nation population are closely related to issues and policies concerning political, economic, sociocultural, scientific, technological, environmental, and defense security of each nation. So this is a very important session in our African Roots webinars. We'll try to see the basic of nations. Well, without further ado, I will introduce you to our first speaker, Dr. Aki Yinka Akinyoade. He is a senior researcher at the African Studies Center in Leiden University. He is a hydrologist and demographer, and his research interests including population, health and development, migration, decentralization, agriculture, business. And he will discuss the relevance of population policy for development, particularly inclusive development, and highlight ongoing experience with public health, urbanization, food, nutrition, security, and productive employment in Africa. So, Dr. Aki Yinka, time is yours.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me to this webinar. And the topic, as you highlighted from Pariwanto's summary, actually highlights the issue at hand, the centrality of a population in the diversity of human endeavor throughout the world. Today, the focus will be on Africa, and at this moment, I would like to share the screen basically, so that you can follow my presentation on some slides. Yeah, thank you. Now, the title of my presentation is African Population Dynamics and Economic Growth Perspectives. Ideally, I would like to point out, as many of us will have actually been intimated with, either through travel, either through reading, or through other types of interactions elsewhere, that Africa is big, and in Africa, the geographical space actually contains countries as famous as China, as huge with population as India, United States, Western Europe, Mexico, all can fit into Africa easily, geographically. So it tells you the expanse of the continent itself. And if these countries can fit into the African geographic space, you can also now start thinking of the diversity of the human and natural resource that is in Africa. Thus, I will focus on the human resource this morning and then tell you a little bit about the current Africa's population size, structure, and growth, what this means in relation to urbanization, economic realities, and inclusive development, and how inclusive development is linked actually to issues of migration and the paradoxes that are now emerging in the migration towards our conclusion. When we look at the world itself, and every year we try to calculate how many people are in the world, and as of November 15 last year, there are 8 billion people estimated as being in the world, of which Africa is about 16.7% world's population. So which means approximately 1 in every 6 persons in the world is an African. And the distribution within Africa is such that you could find 45 people in every square kilometer. Of course, that does not mean we find people everywhere. There are still desert areas like the Sahara Desert. We have the Namib Desert, which practically houses nobody. So the distribution may not be as even as presented, but statistically, 45 persons per square kilometer. But this is projected. Africa's population is projected to reach 8.5 billion. World's population is projected to reach 8.5 billion in 2030. By 2050, in less than 30 years' time, world's population will find 1 in every 5 people in the world to be an African. And by 2100th century, 1 in every 4 persons in the world will be an African. This projected increase will come from 8 countries, the 10.4 billion people that we have. But out of these 8 countries that contribute to this number, 5 are from Africa. Large populations, the Democratic Republic of Congo, Egypt, Ethiopia, Nigeria, and United Republic of Tanzania. They will contribute a lot, more than half of the projected increase to world's population. This, you'll find that, interestingly, they are in different geographical regions of Africa. Nigeria in West Africa, the Republic of Tanzania in East Africa, Ethiopia in the Horn, Egypt in the north, DRC in southwest Africa. So it's quite interesting to see again the distribution to expect in the future for the composition of world's population. Africa is big, yes, and it's projected to be big, yes. But it was a starting point. Has Africa always been like this? No, really. When you looked at backward projections of statistics, European population actually was much more than Africa many years back. However, as European population started to decline, Africa's population started to increase. Some of this increase could be related to the development in conquering many of the childhood diseases. Vaccinations were introduced, people were now living longer. However, there has been an existing population momentum, so that the numbers that were there, particularly for the total fertility rate of women. Let us remember that the total fertility rate of women is the average number of women, average number of children that is statistically estimated for women to have if they continue at current childbearing rates. So, for instance, the total fertility rate of African countries is quite high, set at about 4 children per woman, much higher than many of the world's total fertility rates. In fact, in Europe, it's declined to less than 2 children per woman. And when this declines to less than 2 children per woman, then we have to experience what we call population decline, because the replacement population is not there. So when we now look at Africa's population and say we delve closer, we start to realize that as of 2022, with Africa's population at 1.4 billion, Eastern Africa had the most population, 473 million, while Southern Africa had the least population of 69 million. When we looked at Indonesia, our dear old Indonesia, the population is estimated at 275 million in 2022. But the difference is this, because the issue is not the size of population, but the rate of growth of population. When you look at the rate of growth of population of African countries or African regions, some as high as 3.1%, 2.5%, 2.6%, meaning that the population of such regions will double in the next 30 years. While, for instance, when you look at, despite the big size of Indonesia, big population size of Indonesia, its rate of natural increase is just 0.7%. Therefore, it's growing slowly. Same way for Europe, minus 0.3%. It's actually declining, such that the current population of Europe, set at 742 million, will actually decline to 724 million by 2050. So let us keep in mind that it is not about the size of the population, but the growth rate, the rate at which that population is growing. And one thing it is turning out for Africa, it is making its population composition youthful. Here I try to show again how this increase will come up. Large contributions, sorry about that distortion. But however, we see that, for instance, between 2015 and 2022, within a period of 7 years, Nigeria added about 30 million people to itself, while the Netherlands added just about, less than 1 million in the same period. So we see that the contributions of the number of children per woman is quite essential when it comes to the way the population, understanding of the way the population will grow. And then we try to show here with these pyramids that a large proportion of Africa's population is still very young. The population aged below 15 years is about 40% of Africa's population. So we now see that there's already an inbuilt momentum that if this 40% could even stay at one child each, whether we like it or not, the population of Africa will double. And interestingly, the total fertility rate for Africa shows us that, look, it's not just, you're not going to stay at one child per couple. You're going to go as much as 4 children per couple. And that is why, or per woman, sorry. And that is why we again come back, the issue of total fertility rates brings us back to the issue of size. Africa's population projected into the future would be big because of its currently large base of population. Now, enough for figures, because yes, we have figures, statistics. Then what does this mean in reality? We'd like to focus on 3 areas. The first area is the issue of urbanization. Way back in 1960s, the African map on the left side of your screen actually tells us that urban agglomerations, urban context in Africa was quite low, set at 20% of Africa's population. Fast forward to 2019, just before COVID, you see the African map on your right, that urban agglomerations are increasing. Urbanization now in Africa is approximately 50% of Africa's land space. You see this concentration much more, the density much more in Western Africa, where you see the clusters of urban areas, compared to other parts of Africa where the clustering is a bit still, not that deep. But when we look at Cairo in North Africa, particularly in Egypt, Cairo alone constitutes 20% of Egyptian population. Urbanization, yes, there is a birth rate coming up here, but urbanization is mostly fueled by migration. So this is my entry point again for introducing migration into this discussion, which we'll come back to later. So let's bear in mind the rate of growth, let's bear in mind the urbanization or expansion of cities, and let's bear in mind migration, which we all bring back together towards the end of this presentation. So we see these emerging cities I try to deepen to show that some of these cities actually have populations much more than 15 million, 20 million at a particular location. Mega metropolis loading. What does this mean again? The second implication is this for food. As Africa's population is rising, see the graph on your left, then we know that, of course, the demand for food, you need to feed the populations, of course. Demand for food is rising. So you see the Africas with blue line skyrocketing based on the increase in population. The increase in population, again, now tying it with urbanization, we try to see, okay, for a capital city, what does this mean for food? Capital cities are mostly urban, full of cement. You can't hardly plant anything. Of course, there's urban agriculture nowadays, which we call gardening anyway. There is a particular estimation that when you look at cities beyond 5 million people, they need at least to source for food from the adjoining rural areas up to a radius of 5 kilometers around, 100 kilometers around it. So the urban area is basically sucking up food from the adjoining rural areas. And we see this, we try to estimate, looking at, for instance, parts of Eastern Africa, you see the way Dar es Salaam has overlapped even into Zanzibar, sourcing for food. Kampala, Nairobi, the sphere of influence of maybe lesser size capitals like Kigali and Bujumbura. We also see their areas of sourcing of food. Some people see this as negative because it means they're depriving such rural areas of food because we need to feed the urban areas. But by the time you get to West Africa, then it becomes a bit more interesting when you look at Lagos in the middle. Lagos is the commercial capital of Nigeria. Approximately 18 million people, much more than the Netherlands population as a country. Its sources for food, its sphere of influence is much more than 100 kilometers. In fact, it stretches across international borders to Benin Republic, to Togo, to Ghana, because Lagos needs to be fed. Meanwhile, in Ghana, there's also the capital, Accra, which is about 6 million, which also needs to source for food as far as overlapping to Lomé. Abidjan is there in Cote d'Ivoire. So there's so much overlap given the density, the urban density in Western Africa. The competition for sourcing, the decline in the areas of cultivation means the need for food innovation and sourcing for food from far afield. Sometimes we go as far as Norway, Nigeria to get fish. Decent work. The urban population of Africa is also full of youth. Job creation in Africa is in deficit. Formal employment estimated at 40%. But does it mean that people are unemployed? No. People are actually employed, and a large proportion of people employed are found in the informal sector. You could see the picture which I put on the right. This was taken in Accra, Ghana. These are guys that sell coconuts. They take coconut in wheelbarrows, go to traffic lights, sell to passers-by. 13 people work here, and the time I estimated, I sat with them and estimated how much sales they make per month. They make as much as 4,000 euro selling coconuts at 2 cedis each. 4,000 euro is nice income anywhere in the world. However, the informality of the work means of course, no tax paid. It means no contributions to pension scheme. It means health insurance for such persons do not exist. It means they virtually need to take care of themselves from the money they make. So there's a big division between governance and the people. People take care of themselves, no formal structures, or at least relatively little formal structures, despite the huge revenue that might come and huge potentials that come for revenue. So we start to see a gap about contribution to economy and contributions to personal development. Because of this gap, inequalities exist in the population. And one of the ways to counter inequality, of course, is the introduction of inclusive development, and particularly with a focus on productive employment. Because with inclusive development and productive employment, you will fight exclusion. You will set up structures that will structurally benefit daily life. One of the few outcomes of this is that it will help to reduce social and political instability, because if there is a gulf between those who are in government and the people, despite existence of democracy, there will be political instability, there will be social instability. One of such experiences, if we all recall, was what led to Arab Spring in Northern Africa and parts of Middle East. It was that realization that despite schooling, despite human development through education, access to productive employment was limited. Therefore, protests started. Some of these protests claimed lives. Some of these protests led to destruction of property. Some of these protests led to replacement of governments. But with inclusive development, with productive employment, then we can reduce social and political instability. And we increase the prospects for higher human development index. I wish the story could end here, but with increase in human development index, we also notice that then there will be increase in migration. Statistical estimations of all countries, particularly in Africa, where human development index has increased, we also notice a concomitant increase in emigration of people leaving those places because they can afford to migrate now, can afford to move now. And when you look at some of the countries listed on the top 15 countries in Africa between 2015 and 2019, where human development index has improved, we notice that the numbers of people per thousand that have also emigrated has increased. So on one hand, one would expect that human development index will create a context where, now this place is getting better, now this place I can stay. However, it is fueling emigration. And not just emigration of highly skilled people. Let's look at, for instance, at 4 regions of the world, 4 countries in this world. Canada last year officially welcomed close to 500,000 immigrants, and these are highly skilled immigrants. Physicians, entrepreneurs, engineers. And Canada is dedicating another $50 million to bring more people in. When we look at the 500,000 that reached Canada last year alone, 5% of these numbers are from Nigeria. And they were all armed with tertiary education. That is what the estimation, our calculations showed when you look at the profile of the migrants. The United Kingdom, after the COVID, has also started fast-tracking arrival of medical personnel. In fact, when you look at the medical register in the UK, over 5,000 of people in such sectors are from Nigeria alone. Japan has its own program too for welcoming immigrants, despite the nature of Japan that we initially thought, okay, yeah, Japan really, there's a bit of restriction on what foreigners could do, but Japan is opening up. The same thing for United States. In fact, in my discussion last week with a top engineer who told me that, wait a minute, you are talking about Canada 500,000. We are going to do much more in the United States in the next couple of years because there are gaps, skills gap in the United States when you look at engineers, when you look at medics, when you look at insurance workers and lawyers. Then again, we delved deeper into Nigerian population migration register to actually see that just before Trump, United States have been encouraging Nigerians to come, Nigerians of higher education, and they were sourcing such people at 8,000 per year. Not just for 1 year, 8,000 per year, highly educated, to plug the skills gap in the United States. And it's not just Nigerians alone. We see this program all over the place. Therefore, we look at the context where immigration serves two purposes of migration. One, yes, migrants send money home. In fact, last year, in the past few years, Nigeria has been receiving close to $20 billion per year in remittances from migrants. But the downside is that, well, these receipts are not for government spending. The upside is that these receipts are for private spending. Again, shows us the gap in governance. That there seems to be government one side and people's lives the other side. And this is not just Nigeria alone, this is symptomatic of many parts of Africa. What are the implications for Europe? One of our top bosses here, Professor Tom Dates, actually estimated, and we did it just a couple of days ago, that yes, Africa in the year 2100 will have 4.4 billion people estimated, of which 3 billion by that time will live in cities. The intercontinental migration from Africa will reach volumes of 132 million per year, which currently stands at 18 million. That by that time in Europe, 10% of Europeans will actually be from Africa. We look at population of Europe. But there are uncertainties because European migration policy and political attitude of European population and political parties seem to be at odds with welcoming migrants. Those are the part of the dilemma. And therefore, I conclude with this statement from Paul Collier, which he made as far back as 2014 and which is still relevant till this day. One, our own statistical estimation that high-income countries experience a net inflow of 80.5 million people. That's true. But then when you juxtapose this with Collier's view, he says our views and those of our politicians remain caught between two extremes. Popular hostility to migrants, tinged by xenophobia and racism, and the view of business and liberal elites that open doors are both economically and ethically imperative, with migration set to accelerate, therefore, with Africa's population set to increase, therefore. Few issues are so urgently in need of dispassionate analysis. So we will take our discussion beyond just the statistics of African population to related issues of urbanization, to related issues of job creation, to related issues of migration. And that is where I would like to sort of end my presentation. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you very much, Dr. Akiyinka. This is very interesting when you ends this sessions with the sessions about migrations, because we are very interested about many Africans currently close to Asia also. And also our next speaker is Pak Riwanto, who is specialized from his work. Yeah, many of his work is about the migrations also. Pak Riwanto is an independent social researcher, and he has worked in LIPI for more than 35 years, since 1980 to 2007. Yeah. And he will talk about the political demography in Indonesia, which also related to Dr. Akiyinka presentations about the inclusion. Yeah. So, and his works has we can see his Mencari Indonesia is already more three series, and in English we can see spoke about the politics of migration in Indonesia and beyond, and the political demography of Indonesia from colonizations to nation states. Okay, Pak Riwanto, the time is yours. We cannot hear you, Pak. Sorry, Pak Riwanto. We can hear you. Jelas sekali ya, Pak.
Cukup jelas.
Halo,
Apakah kedengaran?
Pak Riwanto?
Ya. Tidak dengar.
Iya, masih
Cukup jelas.
kecil ya.
Tidak. Okay, let's try again. Halo.
Iya, Pak. Iya, sekarang bisa, Pak.
Halo.
Iya, Pak, bisa,
Betul,
Pak.
ya?
Oke, terdengar. Iya, sudah terdengar. Oke, silakan.
Halo.
Iya, silakan, Pak.
Cukup kedengaran?
Iya, kedengaran, Pak.
Okay. Oh, thank you very much, everybody, and good afternoon. What I'm going to talk is actually slightly different with what Linda presented. Mine is like more specific to Indonesia, and even more focus on particular issue of what I call it how the hegemonic perspective on political democracy in Indonesia have influenced what I call it the making and unmaking. And I would like to start with my first slide. I think I need to help me, right? My slide. Slide number 2. Yeah, my political demography. My political demography, I mean, study of the interaction and spatial relationship between democracy and if politics concern with power and authority, democracy concerns with size, structure, composition, and distribution of authority. Indonesia, in my view, is a social, economic, political, and cultural entity that is continually in the making and making. It's a never-ending process. In 2003, so it's already 20 years ago, I published a book called In Search of Indonesia, Searching for Indonesia, the political demography of post-Suharto era. And since then, I published continually on the same theme, and now it's already 4 books with the same theme. And you can see that Indonesia, in my view, is kind of the idea that we are trying to approach and realize to make it really happen. Suaranya kecil katanya ya. So I start with this picture. Because I think I always amazed by the wonder, the geography of Indonesia, and I quote here from Edwin, who said that geography has a strong influence upon the course of Indonesia, its history, and has always conditioned severally the course of political development. Next slide, please. And here I want to not introduce, actually, it's already in the literature, but it's already and the demography of Indonesia has long been the object of the ruling elite, engineering team, and it's resulting in the establishment of the current political demographic construction. Besides its explicit social and economic objectives, strategic and political goals have always been at the center of the state's demographic engineering practices. Populating the empty area in the island outside Java through the former colonial immigration policy and the post-colonial transmigration policy has been the major factor in demographic engineering. So what if you look at now, it's almost a century, 100 years. So after independence, national integration was the ultimate goal achieved by the national leaders as the major justifications for continuing to engineer the country's democratic continuity. So this is the point that I want to highlight here. If you look within 100 years, you can see a kind of parallelism between what happened in the early 20th century and what is happening now during the 21st century. The states, both the colonial and the post-colonial, continue to be confronted by the problem of democratic imbalance between the inner and outer islands, between Java and the other islands. In the early 20th centuries, foreign capital began to take place in the economy, apparently similar to what is emphasized under current times. The states, both colonial and the maritime, show similar characteristics as authoritarian and undemocratic, with the obsession to develop modern public infrastructure. Increasing problem of economic inequality and social injustice within the limited view and the majority of the population is very obvious from various data sources in the sector. And also, it's also interesting to see how the challenge of maintaining the territorial integration and centrifugal tendencies continually recur. At the beginning of the 20th century, the Dutch struggle to conquer Aceh, and now the Indonesian government confronting the Portuguese movement. Next slide. So here I reflect on what I call it the hegemonic political democratic, and throughout the Indonesian history, there are at least three proponents of this political democracy. The first one is Sukarno, the first president. He perceived that what we need if we talk about democracy, if we talk about democracy, is pragmatic, moving people from Java and not family. According to Sukarno, we need more people to develop. Indonesia should be united despite colonialism and terrorism. That is the theme of Paris, and I will show how the theme actually influence and how Indonesia can see the connection to the democracy. The second figure that I would like to show is Professor Wijaya Nitita, who is an economist, the chief to Harvard Economic Assessment. And he said that what we need is economic growth. So we have to control population growth through family planning. His thesis in University of California is about my youth in Java and etc. So he is a real democrat. He also, according to him, there is also need population redistribution policy. So he agrees that redistribution should be done, but with a different characteristics. Among other, I think, following data, that we should also develop that we not only standing people, but also developing that. He also meant that we use the centrally planned economic development. So economic development should be central. And under Suharto's use also, class case analysis, unfortunately, prohibited. Indonesia then socially is perceived.
Berapa ini 41 nomornya 41.
Iya, satu.
Maaf, ada yang... Oke, silakan Pak Rewanto.
So there is a perception that within the economic technocrat that Indonesia is kind of fast area. And human being is reduced into the statistics. Next slide, please. Then the third perspective that is also key, how we have to engineering the democracy for the purpose of democratization with the business. So I call it a business. In the view of the military, especially the armed force, geographic integration in which transmission policy plays an important role by providing the resources is necessary condition for the attainment of this level. Another important element of this initiative is the concept of basic defense. The basic defense of the Indonesian armed forces was essentially based on the so-called doctrine of territorial warfare. And this doctrine requires that the defense forces, especially the army, be organized principally along territorial rather than functional lines. Next, please. What is the military territorial doctrine? The whole nation under this doctrine was divided into territorial commands, parallel with civilian administration. In terms of the defense doctrine, another function of the territorial command is to maintain contact with the local people so that they could mobilize quickly to support guerrilla operations whenever necessary. It may be added, of course, that this territorial structure has also been very convenient for holding the control. The role of transportation in the concept of execution is to populate the empty region to support the territorial military command. Next, please. So, what is the technocrat military view? It's very interesting because we can see then the merge of how the economic technocrat and the military actually kind of similar views and working together. The critical problem ended within the whole assumption advocated by the economic technocrats and the military is the simplification of the complex real of the relationship into merely spatial geographical. The thinking of those military economic technocrats was similar in the rationalization of the complexity and plurality society. Their thinking ignored the structural cultural differences which profoundly characterized the which was perceived by the military and the economic sector as a human population residing in a spatially flat terrain with a homogeneous population. So then you can see how differences is actually differ between this dominant hegemonic cultural development. Such a society should be engineered from a center of it at a sustained with a uniform policy. Such a perception reflects the subdivision of the aspirations of the will of most people. In this context, cultural defense includes ethnicity and religion from Israel identity. This is the clear relationship is more and I think it's very interesting because the justification of that in the period it's conducted between the process of distinction as military is an important long-term growth on the way there before practice of state here in and the making. So here is actually my problem. And fight for the and centralize the country. What if happened then an issue of democracy practice is what we are. So various topics have confirmed increasing capital inequality that widening the gap between the different socio-economic classes and particularly between the top few and the bottom class. The trajectory of vertical with the horizontal inequality is indicated by the cost of social, economic, and political organization of the local government. It's like for example, this movement and now that's happened. So this is my contribution for myself. Okay. After the reformation, I the economic sector dominating aspect of looking at the one flat entity, unfortunately, by strongly political and also uh, sexual. This is the irony of the political economy that we live in the good party, but still there is a right to have I thought that all of the film shows on site form political participants. The specificity of what I call the final participation has derived from the dominant that narrows military thinking and making arguments to press differences and accountability as the source of care and progress of science. So this is actually the scientific concern with respect to what we need to defend. The capital and the substance is that reality will I think actually what we got also that I love the reference that is profit is also affecting institution response to control with the current process and it will factory to support content. I think in the impact of the African decline to the and I look so the global interconnected the for it and we look at it and what I do is not only two things in and out but also cannot be so in my view the incentive basic mechanisms are opposed to what we need to increase and then and from I think that's all I have. And maybe the last one I described before article aquatic and better Indonesia tourism that is such and capitalize on this sector and we can see that it is not effect. I think that we can say more.
Pak Ariwanto, we cannot hear you.
Yeah, I have my headset. Is it clear now?
We still difficult to hear you.
Okay, yeah, okay, very good. Yeah, but I have right. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Pak Ariwanto. We still get difficulty to hear your voice, but this is very interesting presentations about the political demography in Indonesia since the Sukarno era and it's developed into the new order and also the military view about the Indonesian demography and populations. And hello, Pak Ariwanto, you already get the
Yeah,
yeah. Masih sulit Pak untuk mendengar. Okay, maybe we can go with the question and answer, yeah, while waiting for Pak Ariwanto's get back with his sound system. Okay, this we have already heard these two interesting presentations. Maybe there's questions or comments for the presentations. Yeah, I see also Prof. David Henley, nice professor, Greg Aldrin, Lide, Pak Heru Wicaksono, and also from Embassy of Nairobi, Pak Aris Ananta also here. So if you have any questions or comment, please, everyone. Okay, Lide, please.
Thank you. Thank you for allowing me to start with the first question. Actually, I'm wondering, the presentation by Ariwanto showed also how the state can be involved in planning migration and transmigration. And I was wondering, I know that, for instance, in the African Great Lakes region, this had been part also of the former colonial strategy to resolve some of the questions and challenges of the high demographic or high population density in some areas. And I was wondering if Dr. Kinyenka can tell maybe a little bit more about how African states and whether they are involved also in these kind of strategies and maybe top down or maybe through incentives. When you mentioned also how important for some African states these, or maybe, although maybe not going to the government, the incomes of these revenues for migrants, maybe. Can you tell a little bit more about how African states are involved in planning or not involved in orchestrating some of the migration movements that you have been pointing out?
Thank you, Lide. It's the involvement of African countries or African governments in the organization of population redistribution via migration has bits of direct and indirect arrangements. Take, for instance, within a country, there are places where we call regions or provinces or states. For instance, in Sierra Leone, we have the provinces. In Ghana, we have the regions. In Nigeria, we have what we call states. So the formation, Nigeria currently has 36 states. Each state has a capital city. But before Nigeria got to 36 states, it started from just basically three regions, with each having headquarters. So the creation of states or regions actually comes with it a relocation of bureaucrats and businesses and educational institutions that go with it. Therefore, you see people moving. Once a new state has been created, then of course these structures and people need to go along with it to make the state or the region or the province to work. So on one hand, those are direct lines, not because we want to say it's a migration program on itself, but basically it has consequences for internal migration or redistribution of population. The unintended consequences are this. The creation of states, the creation of regions sometimes go along ethnic lines. Maybe to say crassly, sometimes around tribal lines, so that you find that when new states are created or when new regions are created, they seem to be homogeneous in terms of the characteristics of population. Therefore, for such new states or regions, politicians inside start to make a mess of potential advantages, turning them to disadvantages. Take, for instance, when it is created, then suddenly some people find out that, wait a minute, I'm no longer a member of this state because another state has been carved out elsewhere. Therefore, I would rather go back to my own state. So the movement of people again start to take a form of ethnic redistribution unintentionally. So in as much as the states have been created with capitals, which serves as nodes of development, all the 36 states of Nigeria are located in such a way that they are 1 hour equidistant from each other. But when you look at the constituent population, the redistribution is causing sometimes tensions because people lay claims now that, well, you are a member of another state, or you cannot get admission to this university because you come from another state. So there are things like that that distort the beauty of state or regional creation, but interestingly, not because it has a migration policy named after it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Kinka. Pak Aris Ananta, you
Yeah,
want
thank
to...
you, Pak Helmi. Thank you, Pak Hakim. Very interesting. I'm not an expert on Africa, but I am observing Africa. And I am observing that Africa will emerge as one of the biggest power in the world in the future, as you mentioned. My question is that Africa fertility has been declining and it will continue declining. Are you worried about that, about declining fertility in Africa? And do you think that some ethnic group will disappear because of the declining fertility in Africa? So in general, what is the policy in Africa? Anti-natalist or pro-natalist? Thank you, Akin.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I will first of all start with a departure, answering this question with one thing that Pariwanto mentioned in his presentation about demographic engineering. When you look at, when you want to compare the parallels to, when you want to check with Africa, actually there was a little bit of that. For instance, in 1974, many African countries or governments went into the Bucharest Population Conference to say, look, we are not interested in family planning. In fact, population size, large population sizes is equal to power. It gives us human resource power in the world. So, in a way, despite being not pro-natalist in policy, no active steps were taken to say we want to embark on population policy. It was only later, I take another example from Nigeria and Ghana, in 1988, that the military government of General Babangida actually introduced what they call 4 children per woman policy. And this is basically to let us know that, look, the mentality is that out of 4 children, at least there's a mix of both males and females, the boys and girls. Even though there is a societal preference for males or boys, well, by the time you have 4 children, there should be a good mix of a male and a female in the number of children. But let us remember that at this time, the number of children per woman in Nigeria was at 7 children per woman. And the government was trying to reduce structurally and say, okay, let us go down to 4, because I think we are growing too much. And with 4, you can have a good mix among siblings of children that you have. This policy did not, interestingly, compared to Indonesia at this time, Indonesia already had 2 children per woman as its own policy in the 80s. So you could see it again that gap when you compare continentally or across countries in different continents. Many African governments were still that high when it comes to the pro-natalist stance. The pro-natalist stance, like I said, was not written in any policy. But again, they try to structure, maybe part of the social engineer understanding of the social dynamics is that within many parts of Africa, in most parts of Africa, there's nothing like a voluntary childlessness, meaning couples marrying and deciding not to have children. In fact, within few months of couples getting married, many family members already asking, where is the pregnancy? Where is the children? When is our grandchild coming? So such questions are asked. So the anti-natalist societal attitude, it's difficult to actually to introduce population policies that could be easily embraced. A lot of factors need to be taken on board when this is to be done across Africa. But the good thing is this: over time, as you see in the graph that I presented, the total fertility rates for many African countries have been declining. Not because there is a specific population policy in regions or in countries, but because actually privately, because childbearing is in private domain, privately, many couples are actually deciding within themselves to have fewer children. This will decline. In Nigeria currently stands at 4 children per woman. Remember, we started at 7 children. Niger Republic started at 8 children. Uganda started at 8 children, looking at the measurements of statistics 30, 40 years ago. Many of these countries are now at 4. There will be further decline. But this further decline, unfortunately, while it is in good trend, as many of us in demography will say, it already has in it a population growth momentum, such that the numbers of Africans will continue to increase at least until the year 2100. So that is the current context for now. Really.
Thank you. Paris, any further questions?
No, no, thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. And thank you, Yenka. Is there any other questions from the audience? Actually, this two presentation actually very interesting when if I try to compare the situation in Nigeria, where Dr. Aki Yinka come from, and in Indonesia, where what Pak Riwanto mentions about the unity and the oneness of Indonesia somehow creates suppressions to the diversity of Indonesian populations. On the other hand, another extreme is Nigeria, with very diverse ethnicity, and it embraced very much with Dr. Aki Yinka mentions about, and people often mentions about Africa is quite often fighting about this diversity and ethnicity problems, and how Pak Riwanto and Aki Yinka try to reflect about this two polars of these situations. Riwanto, do you have any this brother? Riwanto? Still freezing? Riwanto?
Yeah, sorry. I have a very bad connection, I think. If you hear me,
Yes. Yes, Pak.
yeah, sorry, my connection is not good. So, for Indonesia, I think after the downfall of Soeharto, there is a strong attempt to decentralize, to appreciate differences, to give an autonomy to the region. But I think the initial idea to give the autonomy to the sovereign, this is actually the original idea of the planner, Professor Riyad Mahrez, to give the autonomy to the province. It was resented by the armed force. And the compromise is then autonomy is given to the kabupaten, to the district level. And I think then there is a problem with that, but when we knew something, I think of the number of districts is very vast, and I think there is a problem with the original idea that property, closeness of the government to the people, and so on. It's not really realized. So I still think that perhaps we should think about giving more autonomy to the wider states, not really federal. I think I'm not sure if Nigeria is a federal. What is federal? Indonesia is still a unitary state, but if the regional autonomy is given to the province, and I don't think there is a problem with it, because there is no evidence in the Indonesian history except one. That's the Republic South Maluku that want to be separate from Republic Indonesia. So I don't think it's really up to us to give autonomy to them. And if that is the case, then I believe that maybe pluralism, democracy, and as well well can be allowed. That is maybe what I think. I hope I have a clear thought.
Okay. Thank you, Pak Riwanto. Okay,
Yeah.
Inga?
Yeah, thank you. I would like to actually tie this question or your comment on ethnic diversity or composition with a question actually asked earlier by Arisananta regarding would some ethnic groups disappear? Two things are happening. One, the diversity of African population, which is quite huge, is also related to diversity of its languages, of languages used. And three things have come up in the past few decades after independence. The adoption of English, French, and Portuguese in different regions as official language of communication, language of instruction in schools, and language of exchange in business. And the diffusion of African people is leading to a decline in certain languages. Some languages are getting out of circulation, so to speak. While people may still retain their connections to ethnic backgrounds, I'm a Yoruba, Igbo, Hausa, Fulani, and the like, Twi. Basically, at home, what we are finding out now is that the use of local languages is disappearing fast, while the use of English and other European languages have actually taken the public space. So that's going on. And the diffusion of population within the countries are also happening because there are intermarriages, social diffusion. People still, of course, despite the marriages, still have some romantic connections to their ethnic origins. However, the offsprings, the children that are coming, really, are now born in urban spaces and they relate much more to the urban space. The third thing related to this is the issue of international migration, where the diffusion goes beyond national borders and the diffusion actually gets to connections, social connections with people of other national jurisdictions. And therefore, we see and imagine a crop of children growing up with minimum 2 nationalities. It is increasing, whether we like it or not. However, certain governments have certain rules in place in their constitutions that once you are a dual citizenship, once you have dual citizenship, then there is a limit to where you can rise to in society, whether in governance, whether in the security services, whether in administration of sorts. Some African countries have it in their books, in their constitutions of what it means to have dual nationality and what function you can have in society. The third part, which again I'll relate to, and finally to Pariwanto's presentation, was also where he mentioned that at some point, actually, the spaces are sort of, because of our, maybe, I don't know, globalization or the way we interact internationally, there are now new spaces of functions. Take, for instance, we go to Lagos. I can't if Helmi could remember. There's this a new place coming up called Eco Atlantic City. It's an urban international space, physically located in Nigeria, but honestly, when you look at what is within it, it's an international jurisdiction. And these are happening. You see these spaces in many parts of West Africa coming up now. International enclaves within national jurisdictions. Communications also sort of erasing borders. Multinational corporations exchanging staff up and down the place. And even interestingly, there's now an increase in the number of African multinational corporations where staff go from one country to the other, conducting businesses. So this diffusion sometimes is a strength because the freedom of movement across the regions. Sometimes it's a weakness because it contributes to the disappearance of languages and adoption of other kind of social characteristics, though they may not be negative but alien to where they are being used. So that is my contribution on the diversity issue.
Thank you, Yinka. Mr. Greg Polgrim,
Yes, Dr. Akinyenka, thank you for your presentation. It had some very eye-opening points about Africa. One in particular, the aspect you mentioned between the disparity or the gap between the government and the people governed, you said is actually becoming in some areas a problem. And I'm just wondering how corruption fits into this. How is, with the perception of corruption by the people, if it's occurring in the government, is that actually adding to the disparity, or is it at the level of a problem at this stage? What could you say about corruption?
Thank you very much, Greg. Corruption is, of course, which we all know that the definition of corruption is wide and varied, and then what it means for national or regional development or underdevelopment. For a long time, interestingly, Nigeria and Indonesia ranked quite high in the corruption index. But then each national jurisdiction took steps to get out of it. In some parts of Africa, particularly with democratic governance, the issue of corruption is reducing, but reducing by my own estimation in superficial ways. What we used to see as corruption, embezzlement of public money, sometimes have now been codified into constitutions of countries where we have democratically elected public officials actually now officially accessing those monies that we used to think was corrupt, which we used to term as corrupt. Take, for instance, in certain countries in Africa, which I will refuse to mention names now, when you look at the annual budgets of such countries and what they set aside for the official functioning of democratic positions, democratically held positions such as members of parliament, such as senators, anyway, you start to see that the incentive to become a member of parliament or a senator becomes higher because you already have certain guarantees of monies that will officially come to you. Mm-hmm. Whether it's going to be housing allowance, dress allowance, furniture allowance in the house, which some politicians officially earning at least $33,000 a month. because they are having meetings twice a week. That is not the best for development. So in my way, democracy, interestingly, is actually now siphoning money away from public services delivery. Maintenance of public offices sometimes accounting for 1/3 of national budgets. While corruption is decreasing, yet the money we are setting aside for governance, maintenance of offices of public officials is too high. And that is a big dilemma. Our hope is that democracy will overgrow this kind of allocations of public money, so that we have better attention to public services delivery rather than the private pockets of public office holders. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mariwanto, do you have anything to say about it? Yeah. It's difficult to hear you. I think the connection is still unstable, yeah. Okay. Here I read a comment from Pak Aris Ananta that I anticipate that there will be more African coming to Asia and Indonesia, and welcome. And actually, this is things that also interest us in Research Center for Area Studies in Indonesia, in BRIN. We saw that there are growings of Africans to Asia, and there are more study about the African in China, African in Malaysia, and the latest is African in Thailand. We just released a book about the African in Thailand. And we also now conducting research about the African in Indonesia. Last year it's about the traders in Indonesia, and this year we are investigating about the African students and also African sportsmen in Indonesia. I don't know if you have any insights about the Africans to Asia, because from your presentations, mostly talking about the African and Europe or North America. Do you have any insights about this growing African to Asia?
Okay, yeah, thanks very much. In fact, the volume, looking at the data which we're also assessing here, we are seeing actually that despite the millions of Africans that come to Europe or the West, there is now a reduction from 2015, 8 years ago. There has been a steady, even though small, but steady reduction in the numbers of Africans coming to Europe, because it's associated with an increasing or the rising numbers of Africans now going to the Middle East, Southeast Asia, and Far East Asia. So, in as much as the rhetoric for anti-immigration or anti-migration is coming up in Europe, the economic development in many African countries is actually leading to a context where parents are beginning to fund the education of their children in many countries in Southeast Asia and in Far East. So numbers to the Far East are increasing. Numbers, particularly Southeast Asia, numbers to Malaysia is increasing. But then what I would like to enjoin us is that, okay, let us look at the characteristics. When we break down the numbers that are increasing to Asia, what is the composition? And we start to see differentials. For Malaysia, it's basically education. The numbers that are seeking tertiary education in Malaysia has increased a lot from Africa. For China and Japan is business. China, Japan, Taipei, or Taiwan, the numbers are basically for business. And you see these numbers even also concentrated in certain cities in these national jurisdictions. So education and business or entrepreneurship are two key components that are driving the migration towards Asia. The question is, for those that complete that, which we have not seen so far, for those that complete the education, particularly in Malaysia, where do they go to? Are they returning to Africa? Are they going to other parts of the world? Or are they staying in Malaysia, for example? That we do not have data about. But anecdotal evidence sort of exists that, yes, they finish and then they move to other new places, not that they return to Africa. The ones that return to Africa actually are the business people that maintain connections with the manufacturing or industrial zones of China, Japan, and Taiwan. That is what we have so far, anecdotally, and the numbers are increasing. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Tina, you have something to say?
No, I don't think so.
Okay. Pak Artanto, you
Hello,
want to say
yes.
something? Hello. Yes.
Hello.
Please, Pak.
Good afternoon.
Hello.
Pak Ahmad, have you hear? Can you hear my voice?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, sir.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Thank you so much, Pak Helmi. Also, the speaker, Mr. Ikin and Pak Rizwanto. First of all, I would like to introduce my name is Artanto. Previously in Homova, and also in Embassy of Indonesian Embassy in Nairobi. In Madagascar. Here also Mr. Heru, my colleague, also I think from Embassy from Nairobi also. First of all, I would like, of course, to appreciate to Brin and also for the Leiden, Madam Leidelwaite, and also the speaker, because we can join this series of webinar, especially African roots, very interesting for us in Indonesia who are interesting to study, know more about African continent. And the second, for the Indonesian people, especially to anticipate Mr. Helmi was called question that, and also Mr. Akin, for the Indonesian people, actually African is very a lot of opportunities, and especially in terms of the social people-to-people contact, and also relating to the economic and business. Here I would like to draw figure out about the foreign direct investment of Indonesia in Africa. The highest, maybe if I'm not mistaken, the Indonesian companies in abroad in foreign countries in Nigeria. In Nigeria, we have more, I think more than 10 companies, Indonesian, interesting in Nigeria, from the instant noodle, and then was medicine and soap and everything. So in my my own view, I think in the future, what is the potential of Africa, like Mr. Akin explained in his presentation, is also will. We do hope that can interact people from Indonesia to come to Africa, and especially in relating to the what's it called export of Indonesian product as well, and vice versa. Also, maybe from Africa can entering to the Indonesian market. And the last, last but not least, Mr. Hakim, that we do hope here also in this seminar, I think many people have a lot of experiences in Africa. Mr. Erwin Jacksono and from Nairobi also can share information. But I do believe that we here and interesting for the African studies in the future will be more increasing. Thank you so much, and I only just want to comment and appreciation to Brian Layden and also the speaker, Mr. Ikin and Pak Riswanto. Thank you so much, Pak.
Thank you, Pak Artanto. Okay, is there anything else? Lide? Greg? Greg? No? Okay. It's almost 5 and we are in the fasting month here in Indonesia. Usually people around these times, 1 hour to the breaking the fasting, usually it's very hungry, yeah. So maybe the concentration, but I thank you very much for all of the audience who stay up to this sessions, and also or maybe Pak Riwanto and Kiyinka have the closing statements about the presentations today. Pak Riwanto, do you have
Hello.
Okay, hello. Yes, Pak Riwanto, maybe do you have closing statements our discussion?
First of all, I would like to apologize with my sound. Yes, I hope in the future there will be more interaction between Indonesian researchers and African researchers. I think Helmi and his colleagues have done a good job in trying to open and appreciate of Africa. I don't think Indonesia has the experience before. So I only think that it is a big time because Helmi and his colleagues will continue doing this result. And I think both Africa and Indonesia patience, and as we have seen, I think both economically and in terms of the migration of the people, I think we have seen, I don't know how many Indonesian in Africa, but certainly there are many Africans going to already mentioned that. So thank you for this discussion, and I hope we can continue in the future.
Okay, thank you very much, Pak Riwanto. And for Dr. Akiyinka, please.
Okay, yeah, thanks very much for inviting me, and also for the opportunity to have exchanges. And I like Pak Artanto's contribution when he mentioned that actually there's already official business interactions existing long-standing between Indonesia and Nigeria, and particularly for Indonesian business interests in Nigeria in food and beverages, and also in the petrochemical sector. So this is long-standing. It has been positive, and interestingly has not received even negative attention of any form. I think this can be built on because there's so much positives in it. When you look at Indonesian business interests in Nigeria, how this can be replicated across forms of different jurisdictions in Africa, where there may be interest also in any of the industrial sections, and also for Indonesia itself, the openness, because on the other side, there will be, of course, corresponding seeking or continued seeking for ideas also from the African side. Now, as Helmi pointed out, maybe there's an interest in the education sectors. How can we facilitate and ensure also the seamless entrance of Nigerians or other Africans also into Indonesia in a way that there also there will be no friction there, or there will be less friction. These are things we have to continue to think about, and the seminar is an opportunity actually for us to exchange views and to build on views and expand our knowledge on things that could be done. So thank you very much for inviting me and the opportunity to share in the forum.
Okay, so thank you very much for Pak Ariwanto and Dr. Aki Yinka Kinyuade for very insightful presentations. And as we conclude this webinar, we thank you all for joining us today for the 6th installment of the African Roots webinar series. We hope that you found the presentations, this very interesting presentation can be insightful, and it's very thought-provoking. And as we conclude this webinar, we want to remind you that the African Roots series seeks to foster a transnational Africa knowledge community and to provide a platform for scholars, students, policymakers, and diplomats in exchange in ideas and perspective on African matters. We encourage you to continue the conversation and stay engaged with the African Roots communities through our upcoming webinars and other events. Once again, thank you for your participation, and we look forward to seeing you at our next webinar. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Welcome. Bye-bye.
Thank you
Bye-bye.
very much.
Bye-bye. See you
Bye.
next